You're just gonna let it run in case I say something hilarious.
But I can tell you right now, I'm never going to use anything that I say for the cold opening. I never say anything funny enough for it, or amusing enough.
You could be very meta and use what you just said for the cold opening.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of the Alien Familiar RPG Podcast. I am Clayton.
I'm Beth.
Kyle Perkins.
KD.
Jordan.
I'm Nina.
And before we get started, I just want to remind our listeners that you can find show notes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com, and we are on Facebook at facebook.com/alienfamiliar. And our topic for today is era-appropriate misogyny and racism in games. Can it be done respectfully? Can a person make a setting that reflects the real world and its cultures and diversities without making it offensive? No, I don't think you can. Okay, guys, what else do you want to talk about?
I know, I was like, oh man, our shortest podcast. Hey guys, racism's bad. We're done. Ugh. That's my second thought on it.
I think that anytime you want to try to even begin to broach this topic with a group of people, you really should know the players, even more than just our general advice of knowing your players and what they like, what they don't like. You're not always going to be playing with a tight group of friends who have known each other for a long time, possibly years, who you know whether or not something is going to be offensive toward them. And I feel like that if you are thinking about bringing this in with a group that you don't know if it's going to upset anyone, by no means should you ever do it. Stay away from that. Don't even touch it with a 10-foot pole. If you think that the group that you're playing with is on board with it and is comfortable with it, it's something you need to bring up and discuss with them before you even begin to do that campaign.
That's what I was going to say. I feel like you need to have specific player buy-in, because no matter how well you know a certain group of people, you don't necessarily know all the little kind of, like, everybody's got little landmines, you know, among, like, the topics that they think of and the way they think about the world. I really think you need to, like, specifically let people know.
Mm-hmm. But what exactly are we talking about? Are we talking about a setting that just has a culture of racism and sexism and whatever other kind of ism, much like, feudal Europe or whatever? Or are we talking about particular plot hooks and, story arcs that center around those things as main themes?
I think both. As what I want to kind of tackle with this, if we have time. I was mostly focusing on, like, the game setting itself includes racism, sexism. Like, the default setting for Call of Cthulhu is set in the 1920s, United States Northeast. There is definite misogyny and racism going on there. Mm-hmm. It is very prevalent in the writings of H.P. Lovecraft himself, because that's the time period that he was living. And they didn't think it was wrong. And we're projecting our current ideologies back on past eras. If we do, I'm not saying it's wrong to do this, but if we do project our current ideologies back then and have a group of people that all completely agree that all these things are bad, it can be a little bit, it breaks the verisimilitude of the game that all of these people getting together, often very disparate people, getting together and agreeing that all of these things are bad. It's not really reflective of what people actually thought back then. Now, there were groups who back then absolutely believed all this shit was wrong, and it's great to play those people in those settings. But even if you are playing those people, I mean, especially if you are playing those people, they're going to encounter it. It's not just, well, I'm playing this person who bucks the system, therefore I'm never going to have to encounter that as a character.
Are you proposing a Call of Cthulhu suffragette campaign? Because I'm in.
I'm so in. But also,
Yes, we're all going to play Quakers, and...
When we bring up historical accuracy in games, all I can think about is, arguably what's more important to you, historical accuracy or the comfort and fun of your friends and players? Because, like, I don't know if I would ever have fun playing a Call of Cthulhu game where I was playing a woman character and had to consistently interact with the fact that my agency as a person would be hindered by the fact that I'm playing a woman. So it just wouldn't be fun.
Like, I ran all I was going to say is that in this group we wouldn't play that game.
Well, I know, I'm just saying.
Like, when I ran that historical Third Crusades game, I knew that the majority of my player base was going to be female or non-binary, and so I chose to obviously make the setting a little more accessible to the player base that wanted to play, those kind of characters, despite it being limited in a historical context. And I think that that's fine. I mean, I don't know. I think that while having historical accuracy in some parts can be important, you also need to remember you're at a table playing a fucking game.
In the year of our Lord 2017.
And that you want to have people to have fun first and foremost.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and that's why I think you have to buy in. I think it's a very, personal choice whether you would want to play a character in a historically accurate time period like that. Like, I feel like it would be really interesting. I know I can't really put myself in the position of somebody who faced, that much discrimination back in the day, but I feel like kind of exploring that would be interesting, and also exploring, what I was thinking about earlier is the fact that if you had a bunch of women playing a game with a lot of sexism, to really be historically accurate, there would have to be some women who bought into that, who had kind of internalized that sexism, because you still see it today in really religious groups. I have all kinds of cousins, so many cousins on Facebook who are constantly posting things about how you need to be subservient to your husband and all that kind of crap. So it's definitely back then there would be women who had internalized that sexism, completely buy into it.
Is their husband lurking over their shoulder while this message
it makes
is being
you wonder,
posted?
What's
What's
happening? I don't know. It's crazy.
In my experience with my religious relatives, yes.
Does it change anything if every player is under some kind of oppression due to the setting? Like your Crusades game. If some number of people are playing European women and some number of players are playing Moors or Jews or just peasants, every one of them is going to be fucked over routinely throughout the course of role-playing, and really the kinds of characters in that setting that would have enough status privilege to be able to say and do whatever they wanted are pretty much going to be sedentary. They're going to be in their castles, those aren't really player character kinds of roles. So would that make it any different? I wonder if everyone's just dealing with the horrible backwardness of the world.
I think you run into the issue of a female character just receiving twice as much, because they're one playing a woman and then they're also playing a Moor or a Jew or something.
Well, I think he was saying some of the people are women and some of the people are Moors and Jews, everybody's got some reason why they're being discriminated against.
Yeah, but if in that scenario, all of the women are Caucasian aristocrats, that's the only situation in which they're only having that one aspect of the oppression. Mm-hmm. Even if they're a serf woman, they've got both gender and class working against them. And if they're an Eastern like a Serbian woman who is a serf, then you've got race, class, and gender.
Nationality.
Yeah. all working together. And I feel like if you try to break it down like that, you are going to end up with characters who are you're just piling this shit on them rather than just kind of balancing it out, which I think was what you were saying, what you were trying for.
I also think that if you were going to do that, whoever was running the game would have to have, like, a really intense working knowledge of how various oppressions happened in that time period. So it's not, like, just suddenly becoming a thinly veiled, oh, this is what, like... So it doesn't become, like, thinly veiled modern-day sexism and racism. Because it did work different back then. It like, misogyny evolves and changes and stuff like that. So I just feel like it would be players playing stereotypes and the DM putting modern day racism in their faces, and it would just end up being really weird. And that was kind of rambly and weird, and I don't know if my thought came across.
I think
so, yeah.
Because, like, you have people that, like, on a courtesy glance look through, like, a history book and are like, oh, the law of first night, well, roll luck. Let's see if the king shows up to have sex with your daughter for the first time. Like,
yikes.
Goddamn, Like, people can look at that and, I guess, think that that's, like, a representation of the time period. And I'm sure maybe there are parts where that was accurate, but, like, I don't know. I think that is sort of a, like, historically, I'm struggling for the right word here, but, like, misconception of oppression that people associate with that time period. So, like, then you have people like James factoring that in, and, like, that's just adding shit on to an already, like, tough to play character in a historically accurate game.
And kind of also, to, like, take a tangential point off of here where you said, like, thinly veiled, like, modern racism. Like, I think that you have to be careful when you're playing that game that you're doing it because you're interested in the story points that can come from it and not because you're just really wanting to be racist and sexist,
right.
And you're making a game that will allow you to do that.
Which is what I'm pretty consistently worried about.
Because you can tell when somebody is very gleefully participating in the racism and sexism rather than just using it as part of the story.
So does that mean that we can't play historically accurate role-playing games with anything but a bunch of white men? Does that put us back in the age-old Dungeons and Dragons group stereotype?
I'm not sure how you got from what I said to you can only play with white men.
Well,
I'm not following the...
like Clayton was saying, like, it seems like the balance that we're kind of struggling with is the verisimilitude, to use that $5 word, versus the fun of the players, in the setting. Like, if you're trying to play in a setting that mirrors feudal Europe in some degree or another, there's a big system of cultural assumptions. There's a whole paradigm underneath that kind of society where that wouldn't be the way things are if people thought differently. You know what I mean? Like, right. the whole religious stuff, the class stuff, like, all of that is built into it. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there's any reason why such a innately oppressive system as that would ever appear without all of those other assumptions dragged along. So, like, in, whatever Dungeons and Dragons setting where there just happens to be castles and, knights and whatever, because that's the aesthetic of the place, to try to create that kind of framework for your game and ignore all of the horrible shit that goes along with it, I don't think it makes a lot of sense and would break down under scrutiny. So it seems like the options left are play the horrible, brutal setting and get what you can out of it, or we're gonna be playing stuff like JRPGs that are just like, Final Fantasy stuff without any, like, real thought put into why the world is the way it is and what the forces are and, the zeitgeist that makes it that way.
Mm-hmm. That really wasn't what I was trying to say. I don't mean that you shouldn't have, like, if you're going for historical accuracy, that you shouldn't have that, all the horrible, like, thought patterns and things that go into it. But I'm just more talking about the metagame situation where you can tell if somebody is just kind of having way too much fun. You know what I mean? Mm. Like, calling people racial slurs or making gender-based slurs or something like that. Like, I'm more talking about the metagame of, like, you have to be careful that you don't come across that you're just thinly veiling your own racism and sexism and inserting them into the game, rather than it being for historical accuracy.
Yeah. I wonder to what degree it's even possible to put together a story that deals with anything of substance that could not potentially be taken as offensive by somebody. To a large degree, offense is something that happens in the person who is being offended.
Right.
I mean, we've got such a wide array of options to be offended these days.
I mean, that's kind of like I was saying, everybody's got landmines in their personality, and that's why I think you have to carefully discuss it and have player buy-in before you even start, and then maybe even some sort of like short debriefing after every session where you're just like, if anybody has any problems, you know, to make sure people know that if they have a problem with a certain storyline or the way a certain character is being treated, they can bring it up. They don't just have to sit there and deal with it.
It's not if you're going to present this game so that nobody gets offended. It's presenting a game so that the people who are playing are not going to be offended.
Right.
You have to play to the specific audience that you've got. I feel like you're right. You're never going to be able to do anything that nobody finds offensive in some way. There's no story that somebody can't find something to be offended by. But it just goes back to knowing your players and knowing whether or not they are going to be offended by what you're doing. And where this really is a private hobby. We have a relatively small group of friends getting together and talking and playing this game. And it's kind of beyond the scope of sitting down and playing the game to worry about the people who are not at the table getting offended by what they're never going to hear about.
Unless you're doing things like publishing things.
Yes.
Oh, that's a separate conversation.
Yeah.
No, like it really is.
Yeah, the whole know your audience thing still holds true.
Okay. Oh, this is going to take a while. So I think it's really interesting that we're talking about racism and sexism specifically because, like, I understand it's a conversation about historical accuracy for right now, at least, which I have a lot of thoughts about that. Mostly, why are we considering historical accuracy versus inaccuracy in games that involve, like, magic and fictional settings, et cetera, et cetera. Like, I understand the point about the Cthulhu thing, but, like, in Dungeons and Dragons, that's a fake world. Sorry. Like, it's not Earth. I'm actually not sure, but it's not, like, feudal Europe, even though it is based off of it. Magic and goblins and whatnot. But I liked your point about, can you really make a substantial game without facing things like this? Because I play a lot of characters that face oppressions, and they're fake oppressions. Like, I play a werewolf that a lot of people, like are afraid of because she is a werewolf, and I play, in the Eclipse Phase game, I play Asher, who's a Futura, who has this whole stigma against her for being a Futura, et cetera, and I find that those are just as substantial and just as, like, interesting paradigms to play with in these games, but are still not things that I personally have to face in real life. Like, in these games, in Abena, I played a character with a girlfriend, and I didn't have to face homophobia because of that, even though in real life I do face that sometimes. And in Eclipse Phase, my character does get this social stigma because of, like, I guess it is a type of mental illness, and, like, it is because of, like, the Futura project, but it is not a type of oppression that I have to face in real life. So it gives the game that, like, deep and interesting storyline that does have to deal with oppressions of sorts, but it is not a thing that triggers me, and it's not a thing, like, it still allows me to play this game for escapism. And I think that's just as interesting.
That's really good.
But what about other era-appropriate misogyny and racism, such as our Hunter game last year that took place in contemporary Ohio, where the group went and visited some rural people who had ideals that were not in line with the ideals of the player characters from what from our real world location.
I think that's coming back to what Beth was saying, that it really it's kind of just about what were you saying about how, like, you can tell when somebody wants to be racist, and you can tell when somebody is, like, gleefully doing the sexist thing and it's not just a character.
Right, and, like, Clayton doesn't do, like, you can tell when he does it. It's just the character. It's not him getting in his licks however he can.
I hope I don't, like, make people think that I actually have these thoughts.
Yeah.
And that's a big worry that I have as a game master whenever I do put in something like this into a game. I try to be as obvious as I can that it's not me, but I know that there are some things that I am not aware of that I'm being racist. Since I have become an adult, there have been many phrases that I have come to learn are racist that I have stopped using. And I know that there are other phrases in my vocabulary that I use, and I hope to God I've never used any of them on this podcast. But I just don't know that they're offensive, that they're racist, that they're sexist.
Yeah.
And that is very era appropriate for a modern day game, to have a character who just says something like this, and they don't know that they're being oppressive or slanderous, or I can't think of the right term.
Contributing to institutionalized racism and sexism.
Yes, that phrase.
It's like a fucking superhero pose. I'm a WGSS student.
I think when we're talking about matters of, sociology, basically, this isn't something that is so well defined that we can, conclusively point to very much and say, this right here is sexist, this right here is racist, or whatever. I mean, there are some core cases that 99% of people would say that's fucking bigotry, but there's a bazillion fringe cases that are super based on context, on, who the speaker is, who the listener is, and, what the intentions are, and all these different things. It's not cut and dry. For instance, let's say that you want to make a character, make an NPC in your story that is like, powerful barbarian queen or whatever, badass lady with a sword. One person looks at that and thinks, oh, that's an empowering representation of women in a role-playing game. Another person is going to look at that and say, oh, that's just a fighting fuck doll or whatever. There's no right answer. There's no objective measure by which we can, hold these things up, really. It's just a matter of the drifting, squishy consensus of the population at any given moment. So, I don't know.
I don't know why, but I really enjoy the phrase squishy consensus. So, as a bunch of white people sitting around the table talking about racism, I'm curious if anybody here would ever try to, play a character that, like, faced, some sort of racism that you've never had to face, and if you think it can ever be done.
Well, I'm not white. I'm Irish.
Oh, there's a long tradition of
Gaelic. Jesus.
There's a long tradition of Irish people being just as oppressed as black people, right?
Well, 150 years ago, they wouldn't have counted us as white.
Jesus.
It's part of the point. It's a moving target.
I think that it's hard to maybe do that one. Because, like Nina was saying earlier, there's things you can do in role-playing games to facilitate oppression and cope with and deal with and maybe overcome that oppression. But when you deal with, like, a white person playing a African-American character, and then, the GM's like, okay, well, I guess we'll throw a racist character in there, and they're racist towards your character. Like, I gotta feel like there's a disconnect, because you don't know what it's like to have that happen to you.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm gonna try to think of an example, maybe, that I've had of a character that's been like that.
I mean, the closest I've gotten was in your Alter World game, in which we did 100% throw a lot of historical accuracy in regards to this out the window, because, like, I played the first female imam, which, no, incorrect, but, it wasn't from characters that the DM played, but it was based on, Crusader, the Third Crusade?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I'm so good at this.
King's Crusade.
The King's Crusade. And there were characters that were Crusaders, and my character was an imam, and I had to interact with that. But I think that's like the closest that I could get to
and even then, I you know, and I can, as a historian, I can speak to the fact that, like, around that time period, it was less about skin color and more about religious identity. So, I mean, you could have brown skin and be a Christian, and people weren't going to look down on you as much as if you were brown skin and you know, a Muslim.
That's actually
So that was where most of that was coming from.
That actually calls back to the point that I made about, like, modern day bigotry versus historically accurate bigotry. Because, like you said, it wasn't so much a race thing.
Yeah, you know, I mean, now that's a very, like, for me to say that, like, definitively, I can, but, like, it's, I mean, it's like anything. You're going to have outlying cases, and you're going to have outliers to that sort of way of thinking. I mean, I could bring up, you know, the fact that, like, when the First Crusade happened, you know, there was definitely Christians in Jerusalem, but, you know, in that sort of bloodlust and sort of when you're sacking something, you know, that kind of goes out the window, even though you were coming over there to protect those people in the first place. So,
well, and one thing that I don't think really gets play in most games that try to have some degree of historical accuracy is just how throughout human history there has always been us versus them. There's always been we are the civilized, everybody else is the barbarian. The barbarian being rooted in a Greek term that just meant somebody who didn't speak Greek. And whenever you do go back and, like, if you do want to have any degree of historical accuracy, there is going to be that mentality of just, well, the people from this geographical area are inherently better because we whooped all your asses when in war, and now that gives us the right to take you as slaves because you are inferior to us. And I feel like that's an area that really happened, but is not really a part of the thought processes of most of the historical game settings.
Mm-hmm. To like a civilized versus less civilized sort of divide.
Yeah, and where the definition of civilization is just my culture.
Exactly.
Everything else is barbarous.
I am curious if anyone here can think of an example of where they've played a character that was not their, I guess, race and had discrimination happen to the character, and, like, did they feel like they could respond to that in a valid way, or?
I've played characters of different ethnicities, but I have never had a GM with the guts to even bring that up in the setting. And sometimes the setting it just wouldn't really apply, but yeah, that's usually one of the hot potatoes that nobody wants to deal with. But I think it's really funny, like, from a kind of bird's eye view ethical perspective, how wrapped up we are in these kinds of things. But if somebody just had a hobby of going out and chopping people's heads off and making necklaces out of their ears in a D&D game, people think that guy's kind of weird, but he'd still be...
Man, you're playing a really quirky character, dude.
Man, you're such a good tank. Like, I'm glad you're here.
I mean, I think that is because...
God, the tank. Thank God for the tank.
No, but I think that is because, like, no player is going to, like, go out and have to be afraid that somebody is going to, like, come and chop their ear off and wear it as a necklace. Like, however, some players are going out into the world and facing, like, real life oppressions that they kind of don't want to deal with in game.
So, like, more of a... Like that, okay. That could happen.
Okay, but it's not! But
it's highly statistically improbable.
Wow!
But, you know, I think that's funny. I'm sorry. You're very valid point.
I know, I was like trying to be fucking serious over here, but no, it's fine. Such a great fucking tank.
As that guy is, like, chopping your ear off, you're like, man, I bet he could, like, soak a couple bullets for me. But, I don't know. Oddly enough, I think the one time I was playing and oh god, this is gonna like blur some lines. I was playing a half elf in a fantasy game. That was like born to like a nomadic, air quotes around that word, nomadic human mother and an elf from the city. So he was of a darker skin tone. And there was like, we ran into like some mercenaries that were giving my character shit for A, being a nerd, which he was a wizard. 2, being like elvish, and then 3, not being like light skinned.
That's a lot.
Yeah, they were just like again, you know, but like they were carbon or wow, fuck, sorry. They were like cardboard cutout villains. Like nothing about these guys was redeemable at all, right? You know, they were the next fight. Was it like a sort of, I guess, racist moment? Sure. But at the end of the day, like, I don't know if we can really include that in because 1, the fantasy element, and then 2, like, I think it's a lot different for you to, like, be playing a near contemporary game and be playing, like, a Latino character and have someone, like, assume a negative stereotype about you, you know, versus cutout villains.
I actually have a really kind of like, probably controversial opinion. If you make a completely evil character, kind of racist and sexist, I'm kind of fine with that. Gotta beat him anyway, right? Like, he's evil.
What about player character?
I'm not fond of that. However, I meant like a villain, like a big bad in the game.
Yeah, that is the easiest way to make a group of people hate
someone.
Villain, hate
Yeah,
someone,
exactly.
Is have them say the smallest, like, just under their breath,
Nice
racist
swing
thing.
for a woman.
Right, and then
Everyone's like, oh, that guy! Where's that guy that cuts off ears? Get over here!
One thing that's always cracked me up along these lines is in every edition of Dungeons and Dragons I can think of going back, the Ranger has had the favorite enemy class ability, where you've got a list of, you know, various sorts of opponents that you can focus on, and you really hate them, and you know everything about them and how to hunt them and kill them most effectively. And so let me ask you guys, at what point does favorite enemy become racism? Is it racism when your favorite enemy is orcs?
it's fantasy racism, yeah.
Yeah, I kind of think so.
Fantasy racism. Like I said,
Yeah.
I'm fine with, like, that's, I think it's an interesting way to, like, throw it into, like I said before, throw it into a game and, like, deal with interesting things like that and not have to be like, yeah, but fuck black people, am I right?
Jesus.
You can have favorite enemy drow elves, but you can't have favorite enemy black humans. But favorite enemy elves is a different favorite enemy than drow elves.
Well, see, I guess like that's a fair point too. Like, if someone came up to me and was like, "I'm playing a hunter or ranger, sorry, in 3.5, and my favorite enemy is going to be an orc," I'd be like, "Okay, my favorite enemy is going to be a drow elf." Okay, my favorite enemy is black humans. Okay, absolutely not.
Hang on.
You have to be evil in order to take humans as a favorite enemy in 3rd edition, though.
But that's just
True, too.
humans overall. It's not just like,
They're like,
Oh, no.
they're like white-skinned
Weirds.
humans are fine, but like if anyone that's like dark, like favorite enemy, and I'm like, no.
you can't do that, sorry, bud.
Short of one exception, drow are universally evil, so that's
Are they really?
cosmically sanctioned.
Well,
Are they really?
It depends on It actually depends on the era in which the fiction is being written, because there for a while, like, it became the trope that every drow was a good aligned drow fighting against the oppression of his evil people.
I love it. I love it so much.
Orcs also just evil. Period. They only really have a chance of good if they're half orcs, because they got some of that human blood that gives them a chance.
Have a chance.
I think that also just speaks to how limiting morality systems, especially in like D&D, are in general, which is a completely separate conversation to have. So I'm not going to get into it.
I think it's fairly closely aligned to what we're talking about here.
But when you have that fantasy racism, where is the line between, like, it's still just fantasy racism versus, you know what, I can tell that you are saying something about my ethnic group here in the things that you are saying about this group of elves that live out in the woods.
I mean, yeah, I think it's you can tell. Like, it's a thing that, like, people can tell when you see somebody play a character. And then, like, at that point, you gotta be like, sorry, dude, you can't do that.
And that's someone you don't want to play role-playing games with.
Oh, that's another thing. Like, just, guys, if there's somebody racist in your group, just kind of tell them, you know? Like, kind of just inform them, please. Or not like overall racist, but if they're doing, like, a bad thing, and they might not know, tell them. That's real fun conversation to have.
Oh, yeah. It's always very easy to convince somebody that they're being racist.
No, I know. Like, if you're playing with, like, I feel like, like you said, if you had a word that was just part of your vernacular and you didn't know that it was, like, a slur or something, and one of us came up to you and we're like, don't know if you should be using that word, I kind of think you'd take, like, either look it up or take our word for it and, like, take it into consideration at least. Like, we're good people.
You know me well. I would take your word for it until I could look it up.
I really was about to say just take my word for it, but I was like, that's not how any of us work, is it? When you brought up the Hunter game, that was so long ago.
It was 1 year. Just over 1 year.
I know. I actually came up on the 1 year anniversary of, like, a Facebook post I made about, like, joining this group, and I was just like, oh, gross. Anyway, when you brought up the NPCs that were, like, kind of questionable in their ideology, I think that didn't bother me because it, one, didn't affect my character's ability to do things. Like, it made it kind of stressful to talk to them, and I had to, like, work through that, but, like, it didn't stop my character from being able to, like, play the game or do something. And also it wasn't, like, consistently throughout the game. It was a facet of those NPCs. So, like, it wasn't a thing that I had to deal with at every turn.
Mm-hmm.
All right, player 6, tagging in. It's your old buddy Kyle Perkins here to stop racism.
Oh, thank God. Our white
hi,
savior.
Everybody. We've been waiting so long. So, I think it'd be good to, and maybe you've already talked about this and I've missed it, but since I'm showing up late, talk about some strategies for handling it appropriately in your game. And I think that's a really good point, Nina, that even if you have racist depictions, it's still, in the meta of it, not going to be fun for anybody if that player is in-game and, from a meta standpoint, unable to do a damn thing. Mm-hmm. Even if you have a drow who is up on the surface and everyone thinks drow are evil, but old, we'll call him Tizit here, is trying their best to really, fight the good fight, but everyone thinks they're an evil douchebag because drow are in this world. The player playing that character needs to be able to do things and needs to have no penalties at all to their ability to make rolls and act, even if the role-playing side of it has a lot of people, even the other player characters, being shitty to that person. Mm-hmm. What are some other strategies for making sure your group is comfortable, making sure that player can act, and other ways to handle this well from, like, a rules and kind of, like, table atmosphere standpoint?
I think that one thing that the game master needs to do is make sure that they're not everyone that they come across is like that. Mm-hmm. There is a safe place for that player or that character to go, and they don't have to worry about encountering all of this. That's what the game master needs to provide in order so that it doesn't come across that, oh, I'm just being this asshole who really does think all of these things. Because that's what I tried to do in the Hunter game is I made sure that it was this one place that you guys went to that was kind of shitty for certain characters with certain worldviews and certain ways of being. That's what the game master can do.
I think another thing is that, like, there's the guide NPC that, like, will tell you about the quest and stuff like that and, like, may stick with the group for a while. I don't think that character should be racist or sexist or anything, because that's just going to be annoying.
Yeah, I guess that's a really fair point. Imagine coming into a game and, like, the guide NPC, like, really friendly to everyone, but then just doesn't give you advice, or, like, maybe not even that far, but, like, just, like, kind of doesn't tell you the whole story, or, like, kind of leaves you out of the loop on things, because in this world he's really racist toward your kind of character, and then that's when you have to step back and be like, no, like.
If you do have the character that's the guide who is like that, they are racist against that one character. Make it a part of the story that person can grow.
Overcome.
They can learn. Oh, this person really isn't like all of these things that I think.
You saved my kitten from a burning building. Maybe not all drow are like that. Only most of them.
That's what I was going to say, too, about, like, fellow players, is I feel like you should make it, like, if you're going to start them out being racist towards a particular character, I think it's really good to have as part of the arc that character they're being racist against sort of, like, I mean, it's kind of racist in itself, but kind of proves themselves to them over time. You know what I mean? Like, it may not change that character's view towards everybody, but at least that particular character, they're like, oh, okay, like, this person has proven themselves.
And instead of having that guide character not give opportunities to that player's character, or basically stonewall them at every chance, there's a big difference between, okay, a player is playing a drow, and they're in a group of people who are racist against drow. And the game master, the drow wants to do something, anything, we'll say like a skill check, and the game master says, that's not allowed here. Everyone around you, they tell you, you can't do that. So, nope, you can't do it. Sorry. Bad way to handle it. No. Now the drow wants to do something. The game master, who is not shitty, says, yeah, you can give me a roll. Like, you can do this. We're going to make sure that you try to do this. You've got, these penalties against you. But basically, you need to facilitate, even in a group that is not roleplay heavy. I know a lot of groups really don't roleplay. They do combat, they make skill checks to solve puzzles. But instead of stonewalling someone and saying, you're in a land that hates you, you can't do that. Nope. Let them roll. Let them do it. If they roll well enough, even if you don't want to roleplay that guide character growing and becoming less racist through actual words, having a roll succeed, a skill check succeeds, a charisma check succeeds, that could be a way to mechanically, you're the game master, make a little note, okay, they succeeded once, they've succeeded twice. After 5 successes, now that guide character is less shitty to you. You've done it. If you aren't comfortable role-playing out solving racism,
oh God,
you can at least have your game mechanics be perfectly fair and kind of facilitate that path through dice. It's not the best, but if your group doesn't roleplay, there's still ways to not be shitty. That's what I'm trying to get at here. Mm-hmm. Hi, everybody. Hello, I'm here. Nice to see you all.
I think listen to, like just as a meta thing, listen to your players. Like, I remember during the Great Gatsby one shot you ran, Jordan, and
it was a team effort.
It certainly was. Anyway, during that, the Kyles were like, they were playing dude characters. They were playing versions of Gatsby, so they were saying like quips, like 20s appropriate quips about like women and whatnot, and it was fun in games and whatnot. But like, I remember at one point me and Nina were just like, can you not do that for a little bit? I don't remember which one we asked, but you guys were like, yeah, sure, we'll dial it back for the game, like just as long as you're having fun. So like, I think you can play those characters, but if somebody comes up to you and you're like, you're making me really uncomfortable with how often you're doing that, then listen to them.
Yeah.
Also, it's not a bad idea if you're a game master or a player for that matter. Hell, anybody. If you're going to be approaching any kind of topic that could be heavy or triggering or shitty, I think a bad solution, the worst solution maybe, is to just barge ahead and do it anyway and be like, oh, what's that? You got offended? This is a game. Fuck you for getting offended. It's just a game. There's the worst solution. Also, I think a bad solution is to completely sugarcoat and fluff everything and not talk about these things at all whatsoever. I think that maybe the best way to approach, if you're a player or game master, would be to sit down beginning of a game, or if you have a session where you're going into a region where people are bigoted, regardless, sit down at the beginning and say, hey, everybody. Or if it's just one player that's going to be affected, pull them aside and be like, hey, player, in this game or in this session, there's going to be some topics involving this or that. And I want to do these topics, but I want to work with you to make sure that they are done right by you. How would you feel if your character was stopped at the town gate and not let in because of the color of their skin? And if that person is just like, oh no, like I have had that exact thing happen to me, and it, like, I had a really bad experience with some guards. With some... Now, in this situation, you're playing with actual adventurers that have really stepped forward out of the woods to play your game.
Do you want an actual analogy here? Like, oh, that happened to me with police, or that happened to me when I tried to walk into a bar and the bouncer stopped me.
I meant to say police, but I said guards instead.
Oh!
You're right. Dealing with police, dealing with bouncers, dealing with professors who are fucking shitheads, refuse to call you by your preferred name or pronoun. You know, you're trans, professor's a piece of shit, and they're like, well, on the roster, it says that you're this. Bad news bears. And so, in that situation, talk with that person, talk with the group, say, this is what I want to do, this is what's going to happen, don't give away your spoilers, but, this is what it's going to be. And if they're, like, not comfortable with that, okay, well, what if we kind of prologue it, and we'll go ahead and start with your character doing this and doing that in a different setting somewhere else, and then jump to the other players, and they're in the town, and the other players are thinking, hey, why isn't so-and-so here? And you could sit the other players down and be like, because the town guards are pieces of shit and didn't let them in. No fucking way, we gotta go get them. Let's go back in the woods and get them. Like, you don't have to have that moment of conflict in the game, making your players uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. You can still show the conflict if you just kind of work with your group or your player first. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I would think it would be just as likely to offend somebody by having a disclaimer aside at the beginning of a session and basically be condescending and tokenizing, singling out a person because of subject matter in a game as it would to just present it as part of the game. Like, yeah, maybe some people would appreciate that, and then other ones might be like, what are you trying to say? I mean, I don't know.
That's why I feel like it should probably be a sit down with everybody, like not to pull a particular person aside, but just to say to everybody, I'm going to tackle, there's going to be some racism, or I'm thinking about having, a sexual assault as the background of a character. Like, does anybody have, please let me know if anybody has trouble with that. I feel like that would probably be received better than like taking a particular person aside.
Well,
that's possible.
Some people aren't going to want to speak up.
That's what I'm thinking is that...
But they could...
Take secret ballots or something?
You could do that. You could do that maybe during the character creation session. Be like, during this game there are going to be these things, and send me a text if you have a problem with it, or... You know what I mean? Like, there are ways to make it so that, like, somebody doesn't feel like they're standing up in front of everybody and maybe revealing something about themselves that they don't want people to know.
That's true. In my example, I was thinking that you were playing with people you knew well enough that you knew, I know so-and-sos might have an issue with what's happening. Right. So I'm going to make them feel comfortable by pulling them aside and talking about it.
Yeah, but you don't necessarily know. You might really know everybody at a table, but there are things that you don't know about people you've known for years,
And that is where it becomes very, very difficult. I don't know if a secret ballot or at character creation. I do like both of those ideas. Though in either case, if someone's not going to bring it up, I don't know.
Right, and I mean, I'm just saying, give somebody a chance, but, like, it's still up to the person if they want to bring it up.
Guys, texting is, like, such a great way to, like, it's to sit down and just be like, if you have a problem with this, text me. Like, I love that response. Because I'm not going to talk to somebody and say I have a problem. That's horrifying. Texted many DMs, nope, it's just
DM'd many
No, it's
DMs.
Actually, it's entirely just Kyle, but when things go wrong, I've like texted him and been like, hey, quit, don't do that, don't like it. Mm-hmm. So, I also think the pulling aside, like, it's not so... I was gonna bring up that we really have a special group here where we all know each other really well, or pretty well, and like, we know who would need to be pulled aside. Like, you pulled me aside when we were doing Eclipse Phase stuff, to talk about, like, Asher's and, like, the stuff Futurists would have to face in this game, etc., etc. But, like, if Jordan was playing a Future, you wouldn't have to do that to him. It's just, like, about knowing who... Like, it's a good group we have that you would know who to do that for and who not.
I think that's a solid strategy if you know your group well. Now I am thinking about if you don't know your group well and they are people you like and they're people you trust, but maybe they're only an RPG friend that you don't see on a regular basis. That is where it becomes a difficult thing, and that's why this is a difficult topic to even be podcasting about. It's nuanced with a capital N.
I'm like, people are
simple. People are easy. RPGs are hard.
All right, guys, what do you say we stop this bullshit and start rolling some dice?
Stop racism?
Stop that bullshit.
Yes. Stop this racist bullshit. It's over now.
We've ended racism, guys. Let's
Congratulations,
hear it for everyone.
guys.
This has been a production of Alien Familiar Media. You can find past episodes and more at alienfamiliar.com. You can email us at alienfamiliarmedia@gmail.com. This production is protected under a Creative Commons non-commercial attribution, no derivatives license. Music for this episode is Suburban Outlaw by Forget the Whale and can be found at freemusicarchive.org.